The last thing Dr. Eris Thorne heard before the world ended was the quiet, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and the sound of a child's laughter. It was a sound she cherished, a rare and precious melody in the sterile halls of the pediatric oncology ward. She was in the middle of explaining the next round of chemotherapy to the parents of 7-year-old Lily, a girl with a spirit far bigger than the leukemia that was trying to claim her. Eris's hands were gentle as she pointed to the diagrams, her voice a soothing balm against the harsh reality of their situation. She spoke of cell cycles and apoptosis, of vincristine and daunorubicin, the language of her life's work, a complex vocabulary dedicated entirely to the art of cheating death. The parents nodded, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of fear and fragile hope. A look Eris saw a dozen times a day. It was a Tuesday. Outside the panoramic windows of the children's hospital, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Then, without a sound, the blue began to fade, not to gray or black, but to a shimmering, impossible silver. A collective gasp went through the room. Eris and the family moved to the window, drawn by a sight so alien, so utterly wrong, that their minds struggled to process it. It wasn't a fleet of warships descending from the heavens. There were no explosions, no roaring engines. Instead, a silent, intricate lattice of light was descending upon the city, a vast, crystalline web that seemed to absorb the sunlight and refract it into a million cold, sterile shards. It was beautiful, in the way a perfect snowflake or a deadly virus is beautiful under a microscope. Then the silver web touched the tops of the skyscrapers, and the silence was replaced by a soft, pervasive hum that vibrated deep in their bones. Eris felt a primal dread claw its way up her spine. The hospital's power flickered once, then died, plunging them into the dim emergency lighting. The heart monitors fell silent, replaced by the rising panic in the hallway. A nurse burst into the room, her eyes wide with terror. "They're inside," she whispered, and then she was gone. The hum grew louder, closer. Eris pushed Lily's parents toward the supply closet. "Get in. Lock the door. Do not make a sound." The father hesitated, grabbing her arm. "What about you? What about Lily?" Eris looked at the small girl in the bed, her bald head and wide, trusting eyes. The oath she had taken, the promise to do no harm, to protect, surged through her. "I'll stay with her." She pushed them into the closet and slid a heavy cart in front of the door just as the first one appeared in the doorway. It was not a monster of fang and claw. It was tall and slender, encased in a smooth, opalescent armor that shifted in color like oil on water. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, featureless head that tilted with an unnerving, bird-like curiosity. In one hand, it held a long, thin rod that glowed with a soft and white light. It didn't stomp or roar. It moved with a liquid grace, its feet making no sound on the linoleum floor. It scanned the room, its gaze passing over Lily in her bed, and then it focused on Eris, on the white coat she wore, the stethoscope around her neck. It raised its free hand and pointed a long, crystalline finger directly at her. She understood then. They weren't here for conquest in the way humanity understood it. They weren't soldiers here to fight other soldiers. They were exterminators, and their targets were the healers. The creature, the alien, took a step forward. Eris backed away, her mind racing, searching for a weapon, an escape. But there was nothing. This was a place of healing, of soft toys and IV drips. Another one appeared behind the first, identical in its silent, graceful menace. They moved with the unhurried confidence of predators that knew their prey was trapped. She saw them in the hallway now, dozens of them, moving with a chilling synchronicity. They ignored the crying parents and the terrified civilians, stepping past them as if they were furniture. But when they saw a doctor, a nurse, a paramedic, they would stop. The glowing rods would activate, and a beam of pure white light, no thicker than a scalpel's edge, would lance out. There was no blood, no scream, just a quiet, horrifying dissolution as the beam unmade flesh and bone, leaving nothing but a faint scorch mark and the lingering scent of ozone. They were erasing Earth's medical knowledge, person by person. Eris was trapped between the two aliens in the room and the wall of her patient's bed. Lily began to whimper, and the sound seemed to draw the attention of the creature. It tilted its head, a gesture of cold analysis, and started to move toward the child. A rage unlike anything Eris had ever known. A white-hot, protective fury burned away her fear. It was one thing to target her, to kill her for her profession, but it was another to threaten a child under her care. This would not happen. Her eyes darted around the room and landed on the chemotherapy preparation cart, the very tools of her trade she had been explaining just moments before. On it was a large 100cc syringe filled with a deep red liquid daunorubicin, a potent anthracycline antibiotic, a poison she used to kill cancer cells, a substance so cytotoxic that nurses had to wear special gloves to administer it. It worked by intercalating into DNA, preventing replication, unraveling the very blueprint of life. It was a killer on a microscopic scale, on pure, unthinking instinct. She grabbed the syringe, her fingers wrapping around the plunger. The first alien was almost upon Lily's bed now, its glowing rod humming softly. Eris didn't scream or issue a challenge. She was a doctor, trained in precision and action. She moved like a surgeon, closing the distance in 2 quick steps. The alien turned, its movements impossibly fast, but Eris was already there. She drove the thick needle into a small, pulsating gap in its opalescent armor, a joint near its neck where shimmering, softer tissue was visible. She slammed the plunger down with all her strength, emptying the entire vial of concentrated poison into the creature's body. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The alien simply stood there, its featureless face turned toward her. Then, a shudder went through its crystalline form. The opalescent armor began to flicker, the colors shifting rapidly, chaotically. A low hum turned into a high-pitched shriek as cracks, like fractures in glass, began to spiderweb across its body. The red of the daunorubicin became visible, not as a liquid, but as a corrupting, crystalline growth, spreading through the alien's internal structures like a fatal cancer. It wasn't dying. It was being unmade from the inside out. Its own biology turned against it. The creature raised its hands as if in shock. And then, with a sound like 1,000 shattering wine glasses, it exploded into a cloud of fine, glittering dust and razor-sharp shards of black and red crystal. The other alien in the room froze, its head snapping toward the space where its companion had been. The moment of shock was all Eris needed. She scrambled backward, grabbing a heavy metal oxygen tank from its stand. With the surge of adrenaline, she swung it with all her might, smashing it against the creature's head. The opalescent shell cracked, and it staggered back, giving her the opening she needed. She ran. She didn't look back. She fled through the halls of her hospital, a place of hope now turned into a silent, systematic slaughterhouse. The scenes she witnessed were images from a nightmare. Her mentor, Dr. Alistair Finch, A man who could coax a smile from the sickest child lay in pieces on the floor of the ICU, the victim of a dozen precise cuts. Nurses she'd shared coffee with that morning were gone, erased, with only their scorched ID badges left behind. The extermination was brutally, horrifically efficient. She made it to a stairwell, her lungs burning, the shriek of shattering crystal still echoing in her ears. She descended into the darkness, into the guts of the building, her white coat smeared with the glittering dust of the alien she had killed. The world above was being sterilized, its healers scoured from the face of the planet. But in the darkness below, something new and terrible had just been born. Eris Thorne, who had dedicated her life to saving children, had just discovered a cure for the aliens, and the primary side effect was death. The next few hours were a blur of terror and instinct. Eris navigated the labyrinthine basement of the hospital, the maintenance tunnels and boiler rooms becoming her sanctuary. The distant, rhythmic sounds of the methodical purge above eventually faded, replaced by the drip of unseen pipes and the frantic beating of her own heart. She finally emerged into the pre-dawn gloom through a service exit, stepping into a city that was both familiar and irrevocably broken. There were no raging fires, no rubble-choked streets in the way she'd imagined an invasion. The destruction had been eerily clean. The crystalline web above still pulsed with a soft, silver light, casting the world in a perpetual, sterile twilight. The silence was the most unnerving part. A city of millions, utterly quiet. She saw bodies, but only of those in uniforms. Paramedics slumped in their ambulances, police officers by their cars, firefighters outside their stations. But civilians, for the most part, seemed to have been ignored, left to wander in a state of shock, their faces pale and confused in the alien glow. The message was clear: your protectors are gone. Your healers are gone. You are alone. She tore off her blood and dust-stained white coat, the symbol of her profession, now a death sentence, and blended into the shadows, a ghost in her own city. For 2 days, she moved like a wraith, scavenging for bottled water and packaged food from deserted convenience stores, sleeping in the back rooms of abandoned businesses. She was utterly alone, convinced she might be the only doctor left alive. The silver sky was a constant, oppressive presence, a reminder of their new masters. On the 3rd day, desperation drove her underground. The surface was too exposed, too quiet. The subway tunnels, she reasoned, would offer better cover. She pried open a service hatch and descended into the familiar darkness of the transit system, the air thick with the smell of cold iron and damp concrete. It was there she found the others. It started with a flicker of light deep in a tunnel. Wary, she approached with a heavy wrench clutched in her hand. The light came from a small campfire built in a metal trash can, its flames casting dancing shadows on the faces of a half-dozen people. They were armed with salvaged pipes and knives, their eyes suspicious and weary. But as she got closer, she saw the details. One man was expertly wrapping a makeshift bandage around a woman's injured arm. Another was carefully sorting a small pile of scavenged medical supplies: aspirin, iodine, a few rolls of gauze. She saw a pair of scrubs, stripped of any hospital logos, worn by a young man who looked too tired to be in his 20s. He saw her looking, and his hand went to a scalpel tucked into his belt. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'm a doctor," Eris said, the words feeling foreign and dangerous on her tongue. The tension in the small camp instantly sharpened. A large, formidable man with a salt and pepper beard and the weary eyes of a career soldier stepped forward. He wore the tattered remains of a combat medic's uniform. "That's a good way to get yourself killed," he said, his voice a low growl. And a good way to get us all killed if you lead them here." "I wasn't followed," Eris insisted, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "I came from St. Jude's." The name of the children's hospital hung in the air. The young man with the scalpel flinched. "My sister was a nurse there." "In the NICU." Eris's heart ached. "I'm sorry." The combat medic studied her, his gaze intense. "You saw them, the things in the white armor," Aris nodded. "I saw what they did, and I saw how they die." This got their attention. Everyone in the small circle turned to her. She reached into the deep pocket of her scrubs, the only clothing she'd had time to keep, and pulled out a small, jagged piece of the crystalline alien she had killed. It was black and sharp, with veins of deep, unnatural red running through it. She held it out on her palm. It glittered menacingly in the firelight. "They aren't invincible," she said, her voice dropping, taking on a hard edge she didn't recognize. "Their biology is complex, crystalline-based. But it's still biology. It can be poisoned. It can be broken." The medic, who introduced himself as Elias Vance, took the shard from her, his calloused fingers handling it with a professional curiosity that overrode his initial suspicion. The young man, Ben, a surgical resident, leaned in closer, his eyes wide. Another figure emerged from the shadows, a woman with sharp, intelligent features and a lab coat so stained it was almost gray. "Let me see that," she commanded more than asked. She snatched the shard from Elias, holding it up, her eyes narrowing. "Fascinating. The lattice structure is almost perfect, but these red inclusions, this is a catastrophic cascade failure, a systematic breakdown. This wasn't killed by a bullet." "What did you use?" Eris looked at the faces around the fire. A combat medic, a surgical resident, a biochemist, a few nurses. This wasn't an army. It was the last remnant of a hospital staff. They were all that was left. She met the biochemist's gaze. "Daunorubicin," she said. "I injected it with a full dose of chemo." The biochemist, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. "You gave it cancer," she whispered, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across her face. "You beautiful, goddamn monster. You gave the alien cancer." In the flickering firelight of a dead city's underbelly, surrounded by the last of Earth's healers, Eris Thorne felt the last vestiges of her old oath crumble to dust. A new one was taking its place. It had no words, only a cold, clinical certainty. The disease was alien. The prognosis was terminal. And she, and the broken people around her, were the cure. The war for Earth would not be fought in trenches or with armies. It would be fought in makeshift labs and with stolen medical supplies. It would be a war of pharmacology, of biology, of finding the precise chemical key to unlock total, agonizing systemic failure. It would not be about saving lives. It would be about delivering the most painful, efficient death imaginable. The weight of Dr. Tanaka's words settled over the small group, extinguishing the last embers of their old lives and forging something new and terrible in the ashes. You gave the alien cancer. It was a diagnosis and a death sentence, delivered not with sorrow, but with a chilling, predatory glee. The silence that followed was not one of fear, but of profound, terrifying recalculation. Every person around that fire was a healer, their minds databases of anatomy, pharmacology, and pathology, their hands trained for the delicate work of mending. Now, in a single, violent moment of revelation, That entire library of knowledge was being repurposed. The art of saving was being inverted into the science of killing. Elias Vance, the combat medic, was the first to break the stillness. He ran a hand over his shorn head, the gesture of a man accustomed to strategy and logistics. "One kill is a fluke," he stated, his voice a low rumble that commanded attention. "We need to prove it's repeatable. We need more of the weapon." His eyes found Eris. "Where do we get it?" The question was simple. The answer, a death wish. "The oncology pharmacy at St. Jude's," Eris replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It's in the sub-basement. Lead-lined, environmentally controlled. When the power went out, the magnetic locks would have sealed it airtight. There's a chance they missed it. If it's intact, it holds the entire pharmacopoeia of cytotoxic agents, enough daunorubicin, cisplatin, mitoxantrone, enough poison to kill an army." Ben, the young surgical resident, looked pale. "Go back there. They'll be crawling the place." It was a hospital, a primary target, which is why they might not expect anyone to be stupid enough to return. Elias countered, a grim logic underpinning his words. His gaze swept over their small band. "We're not soldiers. We don't have guns that can scratch that armor. What we have is knowledge. Our battlefield isn't the street, it's the circulatory system. Our bullets are in that pharmacy." The plan was suicide, but it was the only plan they had. Over the next 24 hours, HFY, the subway camp transformed from a hovel of survivors into a mission briefing room. Oris, using a piece of charcoal on a concrete wall, drew a detailed schematic of the St. Jude sub-basement from memory, marking ventilation shafts, electrical junctions, and security checkpoints. Elias, drawing on years of field experience, plotted their infiltration and exfiltration routes through the city's forgotten service tunnels. Kenji Tanaka, meanwhile, became a whirlwind of manic energy, turning their campfire into a makeshift laboratory. She peppered Eris with questions about the alien's physiology based on the crystalline dust. Did it have a centralized circulatory system? Did the dissolution appear to originate from the injection point and spread? Or was it a simultaneous systemic failure, she asked, her eyes alight with an intensity that bordered on madness. "It spread," Eris confirmed. "Like a necrosis." Kenji scribbled furiously in a scavenged notebook. "Good. That suggests a transport medium. We can optimize the delivery." Daunorubicin was a brilliant proof of concept. Eris, but it's a sledgehammer. We can do better. We can create a cocktail. A synergistic blend of agents targeting different aspects of their cellular replication. We won't just give them cancer. We'll give them a dozen different kinds at once. We'll make their own bodies devour them. Their mission was set for the following night. The team was small, Eris as the expert on the target, Elias as the tactical lead, Ben for his steady hands and surgical knowledge, and a quiet, wiry nurse named Maya, who had spent a decade in the ER and knew every shortcut in the hospital. Kenji would remain behind, her value as a weaponsmith too great to risk. They moved through the suffocating darkness of the tunnels, their only light the narrow beams of their headlamps. The journey was a grim pilgrimage back into the heart of the slaughter. As they neared the service junction that connected to the hospital's lower levels, the air grew stale, thick with the faint, sweet scent of ozone and decay that Aris now associated with the enemy. Elias called a halt, holding up a clenched fist. He'd heard something, a faint, rhythmic scraping sound from the tunnel ahead. They doused their lights, plunging into absolute blackness, their breathing seeming impossibly loud. The scraping grew closer, accompanied by a soft, chittering hum. An alien patrol. It appeared at the edge of their vision, a lone figure silhouetted by the faint silver glow filtering down from a distant ventilation shaft. It was a scout, moving with that same eerie, silent grace, but its movements were different from the exterminators Eris had seen before. It seemed to be cleaning, its long, crystalline rod now emitting not a beam of light, but a soft, corrosive field that dissolved the grime and debris on the tunnel floor, leaving a path of unnaturally sterile concrete in its wake. A janitor. Even the alien apocalypse had janitors. It was so bizarre, so mundane that Eris felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her chest. The creature paused, its featureless head tilting as if sensing their presence. Elias slowly, silently, drew a long combat knife from his boot. Ben held his breath, his hand gripping a sharpened piece of rebar so tightly his knuckles were white. The janitor stood there for a long, agonizing minute, a silent statue in the gloom. Then, as if dismissing a stray thought, it turned and continued its slow, methodical cleaning, its scraping form disappearing down a side tunnel. They waited until the sound was completely gone before breathing again. "They're down here," Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "They're everywhere." "Good." Elias grunted, his knife disappearing back into his boot. "It means we're in the right place to start killing them." Re-entering St. Jude's was like stepping into a memory, a ghost of a life that no longer existed. They emerged through a floor grate into a linen closet, the air still and heavy. The emergency lights were dead now, the backup generators having long since run out of fuel. The hospital was a tomb, utterly dark and silent. They navigated by memory and the dim beams of their lights, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty halls. Eris felt a profound sense of violation. This was her home. She knew every corner, every scuff on the floor. Now, it was a crime scene. They passed the entrance to the pediatric ward, and she had to force herself not to look, not to see the scorch mark on the wall outside Lily's room. She could not afford to be Dr. Thorne, the healer, right now. She had to be the monster Kenji had named her. They reached the sub-basement without incident. As Eris had predicted, the oncology pharmacy was sealed tight. A thick, lead-lined door with a heavy, unmoving handle and a dead electronic keypad. "The maglocks are engaged," Maya confirmed, running a hand over the smooth steel. "Without power, that door has 1,000 pounds of magnetic force holding it shut. So we give it power," Elias said, already moving toward a nearby junction box that Eris had marked on her map. Just a little. What followed was a delicate, high-stakes operation that felt more like surgery than a burglary. Elias pried open the panel, revealing a dense web of wires and circuits. Eris, using her knowledge of the hospital's blueprints, identified the specific conduits that fed the pharmacy's security system, bypassing the main grid. But the final connection required a surgeon's touch. The wires were hair-thin, the space impossibly tight. Ben, his earlier tremors gone, was now the picture of focus. With a pair of hemostats and a roll of electrical tape, he began the painstaking work of splicing a connection from their portable battery pack to the lock's override circuit. "Easy does it," he muttered to himself, his headlamp illuminating the sweat on his brow, just like reattaching a nerve. A flicker of green on the keypad. A heavy clunk as the magnets disengaged. They were in. The air that hissed out of the pharmacy was cold and sterile, a pocket of the old world preserved in the new. And inside was the treasure they had come for, racks upon racks of carefully labeled vials and boxes. A veritable arsenal of cellular poisons. Eris felt a wave of dizzying relief. She ran a hand over a box of vincristine, its name a familiar comfort. For years, these drugs had been her allies in a delicate dance with death. Now, they were simply bullets. As Maya and Ben began methodically loading the precious cargo into their packs, Elias stood guard at the door. Eris was doing a final sweep for any rarer, more potent agents when she saw it. On a small, refrigerated shelf marked for experimental trial drugs was a single, unlabeled vial containing a clear, viscous liquid. She didn't recognize the compound, but she recognized the project code on the label. It was from a failed DARPA initiative from years ago, an attempt to create a bioweapon that could target and destroy specific DNA sequences. The project had been abandoned because it was too unstable, too indiscriminately destructive. It didn't just cause cancer, it used a cell's own reproductive machinery to weave it into a self-destructing knot of corrupted code. It was a biological bomb. She carefully tucked the vial into a protected pocket of her jacket just as Elias's urgent whisper cut through the silence. "We've got company." Eris froze, her blood turning to ice. Through the open doorway, she saw it. Another one of the aliens. But this one was different. It was bulkier, its armor a dull, menacing gray instead of the shifting opalescent white. It wasn't a scout or a janitor. It was a soldier. It stood in the hallway, its head slowly scanning, drawn by the faint hum of their battery pack. They had been too focused, too loud. It took a step toward the pharmacy, a heavy plasma rifle held ready in its hands. They were trapped. "Fall back," Elias breathed, pushing them toward the rear of the pharmacy. "There's no way out," Maya whispered, her eyes wide with panic. The alien soldier filled the doorway, its presence sucking all the air from the room. It raised its rifle, but Eris wasn't looking at the rifle. Her eyes, the eyes of a doctor trained to see every detail of a body, were locked on its form. She saw the gaps in its armor, the network of pulsating conduits that ran beneath the gray plating, a circulatory system laid bare. She saw its weakness. "Ben, give me a syringe. 18 gauge, she commanded, her voice cutting through the fear. And a vial of cisplatin. Pure. Ben fumbled in his pack, his hands shaking as he passed her the supplies. The alien took another step into the room, its rifle charging with a low whine. "Elias," Eris said, her eyes never leaving the target. "When I say now, you hit it low. Go for the knee joint. I need it off balance for 2 seconds." Elias gave a sharp, grim nod, gripping his heavy wrench like a war hammer. Eris drew a full 10 cc of the platinum-based chemotherapy agent into the syringe. Cisplatin worked by binding to DNA and creating crosslinks, preventing cells from dividing and triggering apoptosis. It was brutal and effective. The whine of the plasma rifle grew higher. The air crackled with energy. Now Eris yelled. Elias exploded from behind a shelf, a blur of motion. He swung the wrench with all his might, a desperate, powerful arc that connected with the alien's leg with a sickening crunch of metal and crystal. The creature staggered, its armored shell fracturing at the joint as it fought to keep its balance. Its rifle discharged, a bolt of white-hot plasma searing a black line across the ceiling. But for 2 precious seconds, its chest was exposed, its torso lowered. It was all the time Eris needed. She moved with a speed she didn't know she possessed. Not running, but flowing. A surgeon moving to a patient in crisis. She didn't hesitate. She plunged the needle deep into a thick, pulsing conduit in the alien's chest. a vessel that was the equivalent of its aorta. She pushed the plunger, emptying the poison directly into its central circulatory line. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The alien dropped its rifle, a choked, gurgling screech erupting from its body. The gray armor began to glow a dull, angry red from within. It wasn't the slow, crystalline dissolution she'd seen before. This was a flash cooking. The platinum compound, mainlined into its core, was flash baking its internal systems, turning its biology into a solid, brittle mass. It clawed at its chest, its limbs seizing, and then, with a final, percussive crack, it fell silent, a statue of scorched crystal. They stood there for a moment, panting in the sudden silence, the smell of burnt sugar and ozone filling the room. They had done it. It wasn't a fluke. It was a methodology. They had the weapons, and they had the knowledge. As they slipped back into the darkness of the tunnels, their packs heavy with the tools of their new trade, Eris felt the weight of the small and experimental vial in her pocket. They were no longer just survivors hiding in the dark. They were a nascent plague, an infection in the aliens' perfect control world. They were the Earth's immune response, and the fever was just beginning to rise. The return to the subway sanctuary was a grim, triumphant march. They moved through the oppressive darkness not as fugitives, but as hunters returning with their kill. The weight of the scavenged chemo drugs in their packs was a physical manifestation of their newfound power, a promise of the war to come. When they emerged into the flickering firelight of the camp, their faces streaked with grime and the dust of a vanquished enemy. A hush fell over the small community of survivors. Kenji Tanaka was the first to meet them, her sharp eyes immediately locking onto the bulging packs. She didn't ask if they had succeeded. The answer was etched on their faces. "Show me," she said, her voice a low, hungry command. They laid out their haul on a makeshift table made from an old subway door. Vials of color the deep red of doxorubicin, the pale yellow of methotrexate, the clear, deadly glint of cisplatin shone like malevolent jewels in the firelight. To the uninitiated, it was a collection of medicine. To Kenji, it was a palette of destruction. She picked up a vial of cisplatin, the same agent Eris had used to fell the soldier, holding it to the light. Direct injection to the central circulatory line. She mused, her mind already dissecting the kill Eris and Elias had described. Brutal, efficient, but it requires close quarters contact. Too risky for a scalable solution. We need to think bigger. We need to weaponize the delivery. Her eyes scanned the array of poisons. These are all water-soluble. We need a lipid-soluble carrier, something that can be aerosolized, something that can breach their armor's micro-fissures and absorb through the softer tissue at the joints. We don't need to stab them one by one. We need to make the very air they stand in toxic. Her gaze then fell upon the small, unlabeled vial Iris placed on the table, separate from the others. "And what is this little mystery?" Iris explained its origin. The failed DARPA project. The DNA knotting mechanism. Kenji's breath hitched. She picked up the vial with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics, her fingers tracing the project code. "I remember reading the abstracts on this," she whispered, a fanatical gleam in her eyes. Project Chimera. They called it genomic origami. It doesn't just kill the cell, it rewrites it into a self-replicating termination sequence. It's not a poison, it's a prion. For DNA, this, she held up the vial. This isn't a bullet. This is the plague. While Kenji began her feverish work, transforming a corner of their grimy sanctuary into a biowarfare lab, Elias took on the task of building an army. He gathered the able-bodied survivors, a motley crew of accountants, baristas, and librarians, their faces etched with the trauma of their new reality. He didn't see weakness, he saw potential. "Forget everything you think you know about fighting," he told them, his voice echoing off the curved tunnel walls. "We are not soldiers. We are ghosts. We are insurgents. The enemy is stronger, better armed, and holds every tactical advantage on the surface. So we will not fight them on the surface. We will own the darkness. The tunnels, the sewers, the service corridors, this is our kingdom." His training was brutal and pragmatic. He taught them silence and movement, how to use the echo of a drip in a distant tunnel to mask the sound of their footsteps. He taught them to see in the dark, to trust their other senses. He drilled them in the art of the ambush, using the labyrinthine layout of the underground as a weapon. There were no rifles, no grand charges. Their weapons were salvaged, rebar sharpened to a point, heavy-duty fire extinguishers used as battering rams, and, most importantly, the element of absolute, terrifying surprise. They were learning to be predators in their own ruined home. Eris, in turn, became the chief medical officer of this burgeoning resistance. But her clinic was a paradox. While she set broken bones and stitched wounds for their own people, she also presided over a different kind of medicine. She, Ben, and Maya began training a select group of the quickest, steadiest hands among the survivors. They weren't learning to heal, they were learning to kill with a surgeon's precision. Using anatomical charts of insects and crustaceans scavenged from a ruined university library, Eris extrapolated the likely internal structure of the aliens based on her two encounters. "Forget the head, forget the torso," she would explain, pointing with a scalpel to a diagram she'd drawn on a concrete wall. Their processing centers seem decentralized, but their nutrient and energy conduits all converge here. She'd tap a spot equivalent to the upper thorax, and here, a point at the hip joint. These are the junction points. Puncture one of these, and the system fails. Their training dummies were crude, cobbled together from pipes and salvaged armor plating from the alien soldier they'd killed. But their tools were real 18-gauge needles, scalpels, and spring-loaded injectors they fashioned from CO2 cartridges. They practiced injections on moving targets, learning to hit a 2-inch wide conduit on a target sprinting through the darkness. They were creating a new kind of warrior, the combat biologist. Weeks bled into one another in the twilight world of the underground. Their numbers grew as other pockets of survivors, drawn by rumors of a safe haven, trickled into their section of the tunnels. The community, which they began to call the Warren, evolved from a simple camp into a functioning, albeit grim, society. They established hydroponic farms for fungus and tubers under the harsh glare of salvaged grow lights. They filtered water and recycled everything. A fragile sense of normalcy began to take root. A life lived in the shadows of their former world. But above them, the enemy was not idle. The silver, crystalline web that formed the sky began to change. Thicker, crystalline structures started to descend from it, plunging deep into the earth like the roots of a vast, alien tree. The ground would tremble for hours as these terraspires bored their way down, drawing minerals and energy directly from the planet's core. The aliens weren't just occupying Earth, they were consuming it, transforming it into something utterly alien. The first real test of Elias's ghost army came when one of these terraspires began drilling perilously close to a critical ventilation shaft for the Warren. They couldn't risk a direct assault, but they had to stop it. It was a mission of sabotage. The plan was a perfect synthesis of their new doctrines. Elias would lead a diversionary team, creating a series of loud, chaotic disturbances in the nearby sewer systems to draw the attention of the armored patrols guarding the spire. Meanwhile, Eris and a small, elite team of her newly trained combat biologists would infiltrate the drill site. Their weapon was not a bomb, but a creation of Kenji's feverish genius, a highly corrosive Sci-Fi, lipid-based chemical agent, nicknamed the Solvent, designed to attack the unique crystalline structure of alien technology. It was delivered not by explosion, but by 4 pressurized canisters, the kind used for agricultural spraying. The mission was a symphony of silent, coordinated chaos. Elias's team, using timed demolitions of sewer gas pockets, created a series of thunderous booms that sent the gray armored soldiers marching into the depths of the sewer labyrinth, where his fighters would lead them on a deadly chase through the narrow, confusing tunnels. Under the cover of this distraction, Eris's team moved in. The Terraspire was a monstrous sight, a 100-foot-tall crystalline drill bit humming with immense power, turning rock and soil to superheated gas. A half-dozen of the janitor-class aliens, now understood to be engineers, tended to the machinery, their movements precise and oblivious. "They're workers," Maya whispered over their comms channel. "No heavy armor. Treat them as hostile," Eris ordered, her voice cold. "Every one of them is part of the machine that's killing our world." They moved like wraiths, each member of the team assigned to one of the engineers. Eris took the one closest to the spire's control console. She moved up behind it, her feet making no sound. In one fluid motion, she swung a heavy lead pipe, mashing it against the back of the alien's knee, buckling its leg. As it staggered, she lunged forward, her other hand bringing a syringe of pure methotrexate up and under its chin, into the soft tissue of its neck. She depressed the plunger and was gone before the alien even registered the attack. It stood for a moment, confused, before a tremor ran through its body and it collapsed, dissolving into a shower of glittering dust. Around the site, 5 other silent kills were executed with the same brutal, clinical efficiency. The site was clear. They had less than 5 minutes before the patrols realized the diversion was a sham. They quickly attached Kenji's canisters to the base of the Terraspire, targeting the primary energy conduits. As they set the timers and melted back into the shadows of a nearby building, Eris paused. On the spire's control console, alien glyphs pulsed with light. She didn't understand the language, but she understood data. She pulled a small datapad from her pack, a ruggedized tablet they'd salvaged, and slapped a hardline connection port, a device Kenji had jury-rigged, onto the console. "What are you doing?" Ben hissed over the comms. "We have to go. And information is a weapon," Eris replied, her fingers flying as she initiated a brute force data transfer. "If we can understand their technology, we can learn how to break it." A progress bar crawled across her screen. 40%, 50%. A distant roar echoed from the sewers. Elias's diversion was ending. "Eris, now they're coming back," Maya urged. 70%, 80%. The ground began to shake as the first of the armored soldiers emerged from a sewer grate 100 yards away. 95%. Eris yanked the connection, shoving the datapad into her pack just as the first plasma bolt screamed past her head, vaporizing a chunk of concrete where she'd been standing. They ran. The canisters exploded not with fire, but with a thick, viscous spray that coated the base of the spire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the humming of the massive drill began to sour, dropping in pitch. The perfect crystal of the spire began to fog, then crack. A deep groan, the sound of a dying leviathan, echoed through the district as the Terraspire shuddered, its structural integrity compromised by Kenji's solvent. It began to tilt, slowly at first, then with gathering speed, collapsing into a neighboring skyscraper with a cataclysmic roar of shattering crystal and tortured steel. They had done more than just stop a drill. They had wounded the beast. They had proven their tactics worked. And as Eris sprinted through the ruins, the precious, stolen data warm against her back, she knew they had also just acquired the key to their next, and far more dangerous, escalation. They now had a glimpse into the enemy's mind. The war was about to evolve. The successful sabotage of the Terraspire sent a shockwave of hope and defiance through the Warren. It was their first decisive, strategic victory, a testament to the deadly fusion of scientific intellect and guerrilla tactics they had cultivated in the darkness. The sight of the colossal crystalline structure lying broken and defeated, visible even from the depths of their subway tunnels through strategically placed periscopes, was a powerful symbol. They were not merely surviving anymore. They were fighting back, landing blows that the aliens could not ignore. But Eris knew that their victory had come at a price. They had revealed their hand. They had proven they were more than just scattered, terrified animals. The enemy would adapt. They would retaliate. There would be a reckoning. The data she had stolen from the Spire's console became the singular focus of the Warren's command structure. Kenji Tanaka, her eyes perpetually bloodshot from lack of sleep, worked with a small team of scavenged engineers and IT specialists, frantically trying to decrypt the alien code. The data was a complex, multi-layered tapestry of energy schematics, geological surveys, and logistical timetables. It was a blueprint for the systematic consumption of their planet. But buried deep within the raw data streams, they found something else, something far more valuable and terrifying. It wasn't a schematic or a map. It was a communications protocol, a repeating signal, broadcast on a tightly controlled frequency, originating from a single, heavily fortified point in the city center. It was the location of the aliens' command and control hub. "This is the brain," Kenji announced, her voice hoarse, pointing to a highlighted sector on a digital map of the city. The building had once been a telecommunications nexus, a massive, windowless structure that housed the city's primary internet and data servers. Now, its brutalist concrete facade was encased in a shimmering, crystalline growth, and a single, colossal terraspire rose from its roof, not drilling down, but pulsing with energy, acting as a massive antenna. This is where the exterminators, the soldiers, the engineers, this is where they get their orders. She continued, "It's a hive mind. We cut off the head, and the body will wither." Elias Vance traced the perimeter of the hub on the map with a calloused finger. "The concentration of hostiles there will be unlike anything we've seen. Their patrols are constant. The armor is heavier. Attacking that place head-on is suicide. So we don't attack it head-on," Eris said, her mind already working, dissecting the problem with the surgeon's logic. Her eyes went back to the stolen data. The signal. It's a constant broadcast. It's not just sending orders out. It's likely receiving telemetry, status updates. It's a two-way street. A radical, terrifying idea began to form in her mind. An idea born from her work with the experimental DARPA vial. Project Chimera. "Kenji," she said, her voice low and intense. "Project Chimera rewrites DNA. It's a biological weapon. What if we could create a digital version A signal that doesn't just jam their communications, but corrupts it? A virus that could be broadcast back up the chain of command, rewriting their core programming." Kenji stared at her, her initial skepticism slowly melting away into a look of horrified genius. "A mimetic virus," she breathed. A weaponized idea. Instead of targeting their biology, we target their consciousness, their operating system. We could introduce a logic bomb, an order that would compel them to, for example, attack each other or self-destruct. The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. It would require them to get a transmitter close enough to the central hub to piggyback on their communications array, a feat that seemed impossible, and it would require Kenji to write a piece of malicious code in a language she was only just beginning to understand. It was their moonshot, their one chance to move from tactical victories to a strategic, war-ending blow. The next phase of their war began. While Kenji and her team worked tirelessly on their digital plague, Elias and Eris focused on a new, grim necessity: live specimens. To understand the enemy's network, they needed to understand the nodes. They needed to capture one of the aliens alive. The mission was a masterpiece of trapping and evasion. They identified the patrol route of a lone soldier in a desolate industrial sector. Using their knowledge of the tunnel systems, they rigged a section of a street to collapse, dropping the alien soldier into a reinforced sub-basement chamber. The trap worked perfectly. The soldier, stunned and disoriented, was contained. But containing it and studying it were two different things. The creature was a nightmare of controlled fury, its plasma rifle discharging randomly, its armored fists punching craters in the concrete walls. Getting close enough to sedate it was impossible. Eris, watching from a reinforced observation slit, realized their approach was wrong. They couldn't treat it like an animal to be tranquilized. They had to treat it like a machine to be shut down. "The conduits," she said over the comms to Elias. "The ones under the armor. They're not just circulatory, they're power and data lines. If we can disrupt the flow of energy to its limbs, we can incapacitate it without killing it." What followed was a terrifying, high-stakes game of pin the needle on the monster, using high-pressure pneumatic injectors fired from a safe distance. Ben and Maya targeted the primary power conduits in the alien's limbs. The first few shots glanced off the thick armor, but then a needle found its mark in the soft joint of the creature's elbow. The alien's arm went limp, its plasma rifle clattering to the floor. Another successful shot to the knee, and it stumbled, its leg dragging uselessly. Methodically, clinically, they disabled it, limb by limb, until it was a helpless, immobile torso, its featureless head twitching in silent rage. The captured soldier, which they grimly nicknamed Patient Zero, became the key that unlocked everything. Under Kenji's direction, they carefully attached probes to its internal systems, siphoning a live feed of its biological and data streams. They discovered that its consciousness was not entirely individual. It was a node, constantly connected to the hive mind, receiving a stream of data that regulated its biological functions, its tactical awareness, and its very sense of purpose. And in that stream, Kenji found the vulnerability she needed: a backdoor, a maintenance protocol that allowed for remote diagnostics and software updates. It was the alien equivalent of a rootkit, a flaw in their perfect, sterile system. "I can do it," Kenji declared, after 3 days of non-stop work, her face pale but her eyes burning with triumph. "I can write a program that the hub will recognize as a standard diagnostic update, but instead of updating the system, it will introduce a fatal error into their core logic. I'm calling it the Hippocratic Oath virus. It will target their primary directive to exterminate healers and invert it. It will redefine healer as any member of their own species. It will compel them to purge themselves." The delivery system was the final, most dangerous piece of the puzzle. They needed to broadcast Kenji's virus from a point-blank range, directly into the hub's powerful communication field. They would use a modified communications dish, a powerful broadcaster salvaged from a ruined news van, powered by a bank of scavenged car batteries. The target was the roof of a skyscraper directly adjacent to the alien hub. Getting the heavy equipment up 60 floors of a dead building, past constant enemy patrols, was the mission. It was a suicide run, and everyone knew it. Eris, Elias, Kenji, Ben, and Maya, the core of their resistance, would lead the mission themselves. This was their creation, and they would see it through to the end. The infiltration was a tense, vertical crawl through the skeleton of a dead city. They moved through darkened office floors and shattered elevator shafts, hauling the heavy dish and batteries with ropes in sheer determination. Twice, they had to freeze for nearly an hour as alien patrols swept the floors below, their blue sensor lights cutting through the darkness. The air grew thinner, colder, as they ascended. Finally, they reached the roof. The view was apocalyptic. The city lay before them, a scarred and broken landscape under the cold, silver light of the alien web. And right next to them, so close they could feel the hum of its power, was the command hub, its central spire pulsing like a malevolent heart. They had less than 10 minutes to set up the dish, align it, and broadcast the virus before the hub's automated defenses would detect their energy signature and obliterate them. As Elias and Ben worked frantically to assemble the dish, Kenji booted up her datapad, the viral code ready to launch. Eris and Maya stood guard, watching the perimeter. A low hum alerted them. A single, gray armored soldier rose silently onto the roof from an external elevator, its head swiveling, its plasma rifle already raised. It hadn't detected them yet, but it would in seconds. There was no time for stealth, no time for a precise injection. Maya reacted instantly, a primal scream of defiance tearing from her throat as she charged the soldier, a sharpened piece of rebar clutched in her hands. She was a nurse, trained to save lives, and she threw her own away to buy them a few precious seconds. The plasma bolt hit her square in the chest, and she dissolved in a flash of white light. But her sacrifice had worked. The soldier, distracted by the charge, turned its full attention to her, giving Eris the opening she needed. Eris didn't charge. She raised the weapon she had brought, a weapon born of their first victory, a pressurized sprayer filled with Kenji's solvent. She pulled the trigger, and a stream of viscous, corrosive liquid sprayed across the soldier's chest and head. The alien shrieked, a sound of grinding metal and static, as the solvent ate through its armor, its weapon, its very body. It collapsed into a bubbling, molten heap. "It's ready," Ben yelled. "The dish is aligned." Kenji looked at Eris, her face a mask of grief for Maya and grim resolve. "This is it. Once I hit send, there's no going back." Eris looked at the pulsating hub, at the city stretched out below, at the memory of a child's laughter in a hospital room that felt a lifetime away. She thought of Maya, of all the healers they had lost, of the world they were trying to reclaim. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Do it. Send them our regards." Kenji's thumb hit the enter key. A beam of pure data, invisible and silent, shot from their dish and pierced the heart of the alien command structure. For a moment, nothing happened. The hub continued to pulse. The city remained silent. Then, a new sound began, faint at first, then growing in volume. It was the sound of 1,000 plasma rifles charging at once, aboard the orbiting ships, inside the barracks, on the streets below. Every alien soldier and exterminator received a new, overriding directive. Their featureless heads turned, their weapons raised, and they targeted the nearest member of their own kind. The purge had begun. The Hippocratic Oath, inverted and weaponized, was now the law of their land. Do no harm was no longer the goal. The goal was to inflict as much of it as possible. The broadcast was a single, silent pulse, a ghost in the machine. For a full 10 seconds, the world held its breath. On the rooftop, 60 stories above a ruined city, Eris, Elias, Kenji, and Ben stood frozen, their hearts hammering against their ribs. The colossal command hub next to them continued its rhythmic, indifferent pulsing, a monument to their own imminent annihilation. Eris clutched the corrosive sprayer, her knuckles white, her mind screaming at the silence. It had failed. Maya's sacrifice, their desperate climb, the insane gamble it had all been for nothing. Then, the pulse of the hub faltered. It was a subtle thing at first, a cardiac arrhythmia in the heart of the machine. The steady blue-white light flickered, shifting to a sickly, violent violet. A low, discordant hum began to emanate from the structure, a sound of deep, systemic agony. On the streets below, the true horror began to unfold. A squad of gray-armored soldiers, marching in their perfect, synchronous rhythm, suddenly stopped. For a moment, they stood motionless, and then, with a chilling, synchronized turn, they raised their plasma rifles and opened fire on each other. There was no hesitation, no confusion. It was methodical, deliberate, an act of programmed self-immolation. Beams of white-hot energy crisscrossed the street, turning armored bodies into molten crystal slag. The Hippocratic Oath virus was replicating, spreading through their hive mind like a terminal disease of the soul. The chaos was exponential. From the sides of the hub, Exterminator-class aliens began to emerge, not to defend it, but to attack it. They fired their dissolution beams into the crystalline foundations, tearing apart their own nerve center. The violence was an infection, and the entire city was now the body, convulsing in a fatal seizure. The central spire atop the hub, the antenna that had damned their world, began to glow with an impossible, blinding intensity. "It's overloading," Kenji screamed over the rising din, her face a mixture of terror and ecstatic triumph. "The virus created a logic loop. It's trying to purge itself. But it is itself. It's tearing its own mind apart. We have to go," Elias yelled, grabbing the dish and shoving it over the side of the roof. "This whole place is coming down." He was right. A deep, grinding groan echoed from the core of the hub as its internal structures began to fail. Massive, crystalline plates sheared off its sides, crashing into the streets below. The team scrambled for the stairwell door, their descent a frantic, desperate flight through a building that was shaking itself apart. They were no longer silent insurgents. They were rats fleeing a collapsing mountain. The city had become a battlefield in a civil war where every soldier was on both sides. As they burst out of the building's ground floor, they were met with a scene from a Bosch painting. The aliens were fighting with a berserker fury, their silent grace replaced with twitching, spasmodic violence. An engineer janitor, its cleaning rod repurposed as a spear, repeatedly stabbed at the leg of a soldier, which in turn was trying to stomp it into dust while simultaneously firing its plasma rifle at a third alien scuttling past. They were no longer an army, they were a mindless plague, and their only remaining instinct was to destroy. The journey back to the Warren was a nightmarish gauntlet. They didn't have to hide from patrols, they had to dodge the crossfire of a dying civilization. A plasma bolt, fired from a block away, vaporized the car they were using for cover. They were forced into the sewers, the close, suffocating tunnels now a relative safe haven from the madness above. They could hear the sounds of the battle raging through the grates, the constant, percussive cracks of their dissolving bodies, the high-pitched shrieks of their technology tearing itself apart. When they finally stumbled back into the main chamber of the warren, bleeding, exhausted, and carrying the profound weight of Maya's absence, the community fell silent. They didn't need to say a word. The ground was still trembling with the death throes of the city above. Their faces told the story. For the next 48 hours, they could only wait and watch. Through their periscopes, they saw the war of extinction rage. The command hub finally collapsed in on itself, creating a blast of violet energy that shorted out the crystalline web in the sky for a 5-mile radius, leaving a patch of true, blessedly black night sky. That was the moment they knew they had won. Kenji, monitoring the alien frequency, watched the coherent data stream of the hive mind evolve into screeching, chaotic static before finally, utterly, going silent. The virus had been a true plague. Transmitted from the hub, it had infected the entire global network. All over the world, the same scene of frenzied self-destruction was playing out. The crystalline, the silent, perfect conquerors had been given a soul, and that soul was insane. Then came the silence. After 2 days of unrelenting, city-shaking violence, the noise simply stopped. The silence that followed was deeper and more profound than the one that had first fallen upon the city. It was not the silence of occupation. It was the silence of the tomb. For a full week, no one from the warren went to the surface. They waited, listening, certain it was a trick. But the silence held. The ground was still. The oppressive silver glow in the sky had begun to fade, the crystalline web slowly dying, flaking away into a harmless, glittering dust that fell like snow. It was Eris who led the first scouting party out into the new world. The city was a graveyard. The streets were littered with the frozen, shattered statues of the aliens, their bodies locked in the final, violent throes of their madness. Some were simply piles of glittering shards. Others were fused together, melted into grotesque sculptures of their final battle. The terrace spires stood silent and dark, their roots no longer drinking from the planet's core. The air was cold and clean. They were gone. All of them. They had been the architects of their own apocalypse. Months later, the world was still a ruin, but it was their ruin. Humanity began to emerge from the shadows, from the warrens and shelters all over the globe, blinking in the unfamiliar light of a sun no longer filtered through an alien web. The work of rebuilding was monumental, a task for generations, but it had begun. The warren became the foundation of a new settlement, its people the leaders of a world reborn. Elias organized the security and reclamation teams, his strategic mind now dedicated to rebuilding civilization, not just fighting for it. Ben, no longer a resident, but a seasoned trauma surgeon, oversaw the expansion of their makeshift clinics. Kenji, her fanatical energy now tempered with a deep, weary sorrow for Maya, turned her genius to repurposing alien technology, using their power sources to light up their new homes. Eris found her way back to where it all began. The ruins of St. Jude's Children's Hospital were structurally unsound, but the pediatric wing had been partially sheltered from the worst of the destruction. She led a team to salvage what they could: incubators, medical texts, a box of brightly colored teddy bears. In a new clinic, built from salvaged materials in the heart of their settlement, she stood before a young girl, no older than Lily had been, who had a deep, infected gash on her arm. Eris's hands, which had grown steady holding a scalpel for defense and a pipe for sabotage, were now just as steady as she cleaned the wound, her touch gentle. She looked at the tools on the tray beside her antiseptic: sutures, clean bandages, the simple, beautiful instruments of healing. She had taken a terrible journey, inverting the very core of her being from a healer into a weapon. She, and all of them, had become monsters to fight monsters. The world was saved, but the scars on their souls, like the scars on their city, would never truly fade. The angels of death had done their work. Now, for the rest of their lives, they had to learn how to be human again, how to build more than they had destroyed. Looking at the trusting face of the child before her, a new life in a new world they had bought with blood and poison, Eris felt the ghost of her old oath return, not as a rule, but as a prayer, a quiet promise whispered into the silence of a world they had almost lost. Let the healing begin.